right. Good morning, everybody. Welcome back. This is a continuation of the matter of docket 2011000261 before the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission in the matter of COGCC versus KP Kaufman Company, Inc. We've got one matter to get started with before we move on to the meat of continuing staff's case in chief. Before that, though, let's get a call of the roll, please, Ms. Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner Bogue, Commissioner Gonzalez.
Here.
Commissioner Hackett, Commissioner McGowan.
Here.
Commissioner Mesner.
Here.
Commissioner Nanjapa.
Here.
Commissioner Robbins. Mr. Chair, you have 4 out of 7 commissioners present.
Thank you, Ms. Larson. The first matter before us this morning, and it looks like we have Ms. Stafford and Ms. Rosenberg elevated. Can we get KPK's counsel elevated as panelists as well before we get started? Okay, looks like we have everybody. Yesterday, we received a notice from staff on the notice for dismissal regarding NOAB number 402373684 for those NOAB and violations associated with the Wagner number 1 location. We, the commission, have reviewed this notice of dismissal. And at this point, I'd like to ask staff if they have anything to add at this point.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't believe staff has anything to add at this point. As we've represented in our notice, we intend to dismiss the Wagner NOAB due to the Commission's statute of limitations interpretation from earlier this week.
Thank you, Ms. Stafford. Does KPK's counsel have any response or objection?
No response, no objection. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. As you know, it's a bit of a novel matter for the commission to receive a notice of withdrawal or a notice of dismissal in the middle of one of these hearings. This is a unique circumstance in which case it appears staff has reflected on deliberations in kind of the prior version of the bifurcated hearing that we're in and has applied that to specific NOAVs within this hearing matter. In that regard, you know, I think it's appropriate for the commission at this point to consider that and to take a vote on approving and agreeing with staff on this notice of dismissal. That being said, I'd like to hear if any of the commissioners have any questions or comments prior to moving forward with that consideration. I am seeing none, and therefore at this time I will look for a motion on staff's notice of dismissal regarding NOAV number 402373684. Commissioner McGowan.
I looked at AGG Davenport to make sure I'm saying this right, but I move to accept and approve staff's motion to dismiss the Wagner NOAV.
Sounds good to me. Sounds good to you?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, the only amendment that I would make is that it's a notice rather than a motion.
Would you clarify that, Ms. McGowan, for the record?
Yes, notice, not motion. Thank you.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
So we've got a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
That motion carries. The commission hereby accepts staff's notice of dismissal regarding NOAV number 402373684. I think that that council can let their witnesses associated with that know that that will not be taken up during this hearing. I think that closes out that matter, and we are ready to proceed with or to continue with staff's case in chief. We heard from Mr. Axelson yesterday. Is staff ready to call their next witness?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Staff is prepared. We would like to call Mr. Chris Canfield as our next witness.
All right, Ms. Larson or Ms. Amaro, please elevate Mr. Canfield. I see Mr. Canfield on camera and unmuted. Ms. Stafford, if you are ready, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can everyone see the screen I've just shared?
I believe so.
Great, thank you. All right. Good morning, Mr. Canfield. Thank you for coming back on for another NOAV discussion. If you could briefly remind the commissioners who you are and what you do at the COGCC.
Yes, of course. My name is Chris Canfield. I'm a COGCC environmental protection specialist. I've worked for the COGCC since the fall of 2006. Educational background, I have a Bachelor of Science in Geology from Indiana, Master of Science in Geology also from Indiana University, graduate certificate in environmental engineering from the Colorado School of Mines, and I hold an active license as a professional geologist.
Thank you, Mr. Canfield. So I'd like to talk to you today about the Charter Schneider tank battery NOAV, and I'm going to advance the slides here. This is a demonstrative for opposing counsel's sake. It incorporates information that has been included in the parties' joint stipulated facts, as well as exhibits that have already been admitted in this proceeding. Now, Mr. Canfield, could you set the stage here? Could you tell us where the Charter Schneider tank battery is located?
Yes, I can. It's in unincorporated Weld County, approximately 3 miles northwest of Brighton.
And have you been there?
Yes, I've been there many times, perhaps 8 or 9 times over the last 4 or 5 years.
Sure. And why have you gone out there?
Multiple inspections to gauge KP Kaufman's progress with respect to 3 different remediation projects at that location. Also, on at least 2 occasions, inspections in response to complaints the COGCC received from the surface owner.
Now, Mr. Canfield, I've put up again what we're using as a demonstrative for the purposes of this portion of the hearing. This is an overview map that was included in staff's Exhibit 5. I note that opposing counsel has lodged particular objections to this, but again, we are using this as a demonstrative here. So, Mr. Canfield, could you briefly describe what we're looking at here?
Yes, the area in the center of the aerial photograph outlined with, it's red on my monitor, that would be the site of the Charter Schneider tank battery.
Okay. And what are the yellow boxes?
Those are residences. There are actually 2 small residences within the yellow box on the left side of your image, and then a single larger one to the north, the yellow box there, one to the east, the yellow box there, and yeah, basically that's it.
Thank you, Mr. Canfield. And you touched upon the fact that you were managing some remediation projects at the Charter Schneider tank battery. Could you just give us a brief overview of those?
Yes, there were 3 in all. The earliest or first one concerned historical releases discovered at the Charter Schneider tank battery during an inspection done in response to a complaint from the surface owner. Subsequently, there was a second remediation project begun to address a flow line release at the tank battery. And later, a third remediation project began, and it focused on a flow line release located roughly 2,500 feet to the west of the tank battery.
Thank you, Mr. Canfield. So I'm going to advance the slides here, and I'd like to talk specifically about some of the the alleged environmental violations contained in the NOAV. Now, I've put up the language of prior Rule 210B, and I understand it might be a little bit small, but does it appear on your screen? Can you see that?
Yes, it does. I can see it.
And could you tell me and tell the commissioners what your understanding is of the purpose of this rule?
The purpose is to post signage clearly stating the operator responsible for the facility and providing emergency contact information that the rule would require to be answered 24/7, 365.
And why is it important to have a sign on site?
In the absence of the emergency contact information, the public, nearby residents will default to calling 911.
Okay, and excuse me, I'm sorry about that. Are there any other potential impacts associated with not having a sign on site?
It can also cause confusion on the part of emergency responders. It's not uncommon for 2 or more operators to have facilities in very close proximity of each other. And as a result, if in response to a 911 call, for example, the fire protection district arrives there, it is not clear to them immediately which operator they need to be contacting regarding the incident.
And Mr. Canfield, I've put up what staff has marked as Exhibit 405. Now, do you recognize the front page of this document?
Yes, I do.
And can you tell me what it is?
This is the standard COGCC field inspection form. It's for an inspection that the font is pretty small, but it looks like an inspection I did in August of 2019. Yes, August 22nd of 2019.
Okay, and so when you inspected the Charter Schneider tank battery location on August 22nd, do you recall seeing a sign posted there?
No, there was no sign.
And, you know, we've seen some arguments in KPK's pre-hearing statement that there was a sign laying down to the side. Did you see a sign laying down to the side?
No. During the course of the inspection, I will walk completely around at that time, an open excavation, at least a couple of times. I'll be inspecting beyond simply the open excavation, other pieces of equipment there, for example, tanks, manifolds, what have you. And I did not see a sign. I'm certain I would have seen one, even if it had been blown down, knocked down.
As part of KPK's, excuse me, answer to the NOAV in this matter, they also argued that the battery was removed at various points, so there was no need for a sign to be posted. Does that matter here?
Well, first of all, I'm not sure what is meant by the battery removed. The flow lines were still in place. The tanks were still there. But yes, it would matter. Again, there was an open excavation, an active COGCC remediation project. It's a facility for which, a location for which KP Kaufman is the operator of record. And yes, so they would be required to post the sign with the appropriate information.
And without proper signage at a particular site, what's the impact of not having a sign?
Well, again, the impact is going to be, should a member of the public come by and see something that they're concerned about in the absence of a sign, they're going to call 911. And I'm aware of 2 such 911 calls concerning this specific location. And again, it can also cause confusion on the part of the responders to the 911 call, other elements, if you will, of the local government. Simply confusion as to which operator they should be contacting regarding the incident, and again, the need to make these contacts outside of normal business hours, to call it night or over a weekend.
Thank you, Mr. Canfield. And commissioners, I'd like to point you to page 10 of the party stipulated facts. And, as set forth here, these facts will show liability on this violation. As we've established here, Mr. Canfield performed this inspection on August 22nd, and this violation continued until KPK fixed it on January 15th, 2020. Now, Mr. Canfield, I'd like to move to the next alleged violation in this NOAV. This is Rule 605C, prior Rule 605C3. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
And what's your understanding of the purpose of this rule?
It's a very basic step to be taken to protect the public, livestock, and wildlife, to restrict access to an area where there's activity. It could be production equipment, drilling equipment. In this case, the open excavation.
And the rule talks about adequate fencing. Generally, what do you find to be adequate fencing around an open excavation?
So it would depend upon whether or not the site is currently manned. While an operator has equipment and personnel at the site, and they are actively involved in work at the site, I typically see the red or orange, rather, plastic fencing that resembles a net going up, simply because it can be deployed quickly. When necessary, openings can be created to allow equipment to enter or leave. It's not very durable, tends to blow down quickly, and we're concerned with the fencing. The fencing requirement is not simply limited to when the facility or the location is manned. If a location is going to be unmanned, we expect to see something more robust. Metal panel fencing, sometimes referred to or identified as crowd control fencing, sometimes as cattle fencing, but the metal panel fencing is simply more robust, less likely to blow apart and blow down.
And you just mentioned this distinction between a manned and an unmanned site. Now, when you went on site on August 22nd, 2019, was the site manned?
I don't believe it is. I would have to check. I was there over the course of 4 years, 3.5 to 4 years. There were 17 inspections, maybe 8 were done by myself, and I only encountered KPK personnel twice during those inspections. So the answer would be no, it was not manned.
Now, Mr. Canfield, I've again put up Exhibit 405. As we've already established, this is your inspection report, at least the first page. And it includes the corrective action you listed regarding inadequate safety fencing. Now, I'd like to point you to Exhibit 406, which was attached to your inspection. Do you recognize these photographs?
Yes, I do.
And could you tell me what is happening in these photographs? Let's start with the one on the left.
Well, we're seeing a portion of an open excavation. You can see piping or segments of a flow line that have been removed and are stacked at the edge of the excavation. In the distance, you can see some of that, the flexible orange fencing I mentioned.
And am I showing that with my cursor here?
Yes, you're showing it.
And is there any, I'm sorry, Mr. Canfield, go ahead.
Couple of orange drums. The thing that strikes me is that the orange fencing does not come close to surrounding the open excavation.
And Mr. Canfield, in the second photo, what are we looking at here? Can you tell me, excuse me, what are we looking at here?
We're looking into the excavation. We can see flow lines in the wall of the excavation. There are flow lines that have been exposed. In the upper right corner, we do see an orange drum.
And is there any orange fencing that you can see?
I don't see any, no.
Now, I believe, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I just wanted to add that in the picture on the left, that smooth surface in the lower right-hand corner of the picture, that's actually, it's not a county road, but it's a road used to access these homes that are pointed out on the original aerial photo you were asking me about. And so this gives you an idea as to how close the open excavation comes to that access road for these farms and homes, and you know, the potential for troubles. Someone's coming through there in the dark. That's it.
And can you tell me approximately, you've been on the site, so you've seen this fencing, about how high was it, would you estimate?
I would say it's waist high on me. I'm 6'2".
Okay. And can you, I guess the height of the orange drum, would that be about the same height as the fencing here?
I would think it would be waist high, yes.
Okay.
Waist high on an adult.
Now, can you talk a little bit about, you know, what is the impact of not having the proper fencing up on an excavation like this?
I can tell you that going back to the photo on the left and the trees in the upper right-hand corner, you can see the roof of a residence to the left of the trees. There's a second residence you can't see here, but immediately behind it. And I know there were children, families with children living in those homes and other nearby homes. And the homeowners, the residents, expressing concern to us, to the COGCC, regarding potential for children to find this open excavation something they might try to enter, try to play in. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Canfield. And commissioners, again, I would like to point you back to the parties' joint stipulated facts. Pages 11 and 12 deal with this violation, alleged violation specifically. Now, Mr. Canfield, I'd like to move on. And I'd like to move on to just one more picture here of the excavation. Can you tell me, as I've said, this source on the bottom of my PowerPoint here, this is from Exhibit 411. Can you tell me what this picture shows?
Yes, this is a COGCC inspection photo with our digital watermark, as well as the GPS coordinates and a time date stamp.
And what date did you take this picture?
December 17th, 2019.
And can you please describe the fencing around the excavation at this point, about 4 months later?
The fencing does not completely surround the excavation, and what fencing has been deployed appears to have blown down on the western edge of the excavation. On the northern wall, some of the fencing appears to have fallen into the excavation.
Thank you, Mr. Canfield. Excuse me. Now, when you were on site on December 17th, was this particular remediation project excavation, was it manned?
No, it was not.
I'd like to move on to the next alleged rule violation. We're dealing with Rule 1002F, subpart 2. And again, I've put the language up on the screen here. Can you see that?
Yes, I can.
Now, what does this rule require?
This rule requires best management practices with respect to managing stormwater at all oil and gas locations. We want to.
Can you tell me what best management practices are? What stormwater best management practices are?
Starts with practices intended to minimize erosion, but also to minimize, and if possible, to avoid the transport off of the facility of any sediment. We'd be especially concerned about any contaminated soils that had been excavated and were being staged or stored in spoil piles.
And why are stormwater BMPs necessary at an excavation?
Well, again, there are spoil piles created during the course of the excavation. Some of the material is clean overburden, if you will, but some of it is the contaminated soil being removed. When those piles are present, they present an opportunity for erosion that would trigger transport of the contaminated sediments, soils, and that transport could actually take the contaminated material off of the location, off the site.
Now, with these particular stormwater BMPs, you know, what forms should they take? Are there different ways that you can comply with this rule?
There are indeed different ways. In a site being actively managed, if you will, by the operator, they could use something like straw or rock wattles, or silt fence. They could create berms. So a variety of options.
And when what are you typically looking for in a stormwater BMP when you inspect a site?
So I'm looking at a remediation project if there is an open excavation and if there are spoil piles. In addition to looking to see if the operator has segregated clean overburden from contaminated material, I'm looking specifically to see what steps the operator has taken to prevent, again, erosion, degrading those spoil piles, and transporting the sediment somewhere, perhaps off the site.
Now, Mr. Canfield, I've again put up what we've marked as Exhibit 405, which we've established as your inspection report. And this includes the corrective action. Could you tell me what this says regarding stormwater BMPs?
So the comment is inadequate stormwater BMPs to prevent erosion of the spoil piles. And the corrective action is to install stormwater BMPs to comply with our Rule 1002.F.
And now I've advanced I've advanced the slide deck again, and we're looking again at Exhibit 406 with the photographs we were discussing earlier. Are there stormwater BMPs in this photo on the left?
No, there are not.
And how do you know that?
I don't see a wattle, a silt fence, or a berm.
And I guess where should they be in this picture?
I would want something running parallel to prevent erosion of the material you see through the center being carried onto the access road in the lower right-hand corner.
And if you can see my cursor, are you talking about this material here?
Yes, yes.
So this is the material in the middle of the photograph where the
Yes.
flow lines are laying over it.
Yes.
And was there a threat by not having adequate stormwater BMPs at this location?
At the time these photos were taken, the site investigation and remediation were ongoing. And as a result, well, it's not clear wouldn't be clear to me as an inspector if there were impacted soils in those piles or not. That would be the primary concern, that E&P waste in the form of the impacted soils was being stored or managed on site and in a way that would not prevent erosion transporting it off-site or onto that access road where it could be tracked onto other properties.
Thank you, Mr. Canfield. And now I've put up what's been marked as Exhibit 410. Could you tell me what this is?
This is yet another field inspection form from December of 2019.
And can you tell me, I've extracted the corrective action from page 3 of this exhibit. Could you tell me what that says?
Yes, once again, the comment that I observed inadequate stormwater BMPs, specifically to prevent erosion of the spoil piles, and reiterating the corrective action to install stormwater BMPs to comply with Rule 1002F, and as well as a statement that the corrective action was originally identified in, and I cite the document number for that inspection, and I state that the corrective action time frame, in essence the deadline, has not been reset. Standard practice for our inspectors to avoid creating the impression that the due date, if you will, the deadline for completing a corrective action has been reset somehow simply by entering a subsequent inspection. We want to make clear that the original corrective action stands, as does the original deadline for performing it.
And so when you went on site on December 17th, there were no stormwater BMPs installed?
No, certainly not adequate.
And commissioners, again, I'd like to point you back to the parties' joint stipulated facts where pages 8 and 9 that lay out this particular violation and the duration. Now, Mr. Canfield, I'd like to turn to Rule 901C, and thank you for bearing with me here. I've put up the rule language here. This is prior Rule 901C, as we've discussed. Now, can you tell me what what your understanding is of the purpose of this rule?
Understanding would be that if the COGCC somehow discovers a situation which we believe has impacted or threatens to impact waters of the state, we would have the authority to request action on the part of the operator. In this case specifically, that would be to request a Form 27, a formal site investigation and remediation plan.
Now I'm showing you again what we've seen a few times now, which is Exhibit 405. This is your August 22nd, 2019 inspection. And I'm gonna back up a little and talk about the particular location first. So we've talked about the 3 remediations for the 3 separate spills. Did you have up-to-date information on those remediations when you inspected on August 22nd, 2019?
No.
And can you tell us what you saw during this this particular inspection with respect to the 3 open remediations?
The there was had been action to the on the project to the west, as I recall. But
and do you know which particular project that was?
I would have to look at that would be the third, the highest number.
The
Basically, things were at
13053.
a standstill actually at the tank battery. In other words, I did not. There was no work taking place when I was there, and no evidence of any significant action since I had been there previously.
And with respect to the first open remediation project, I believe it's 9522. Do you know how long that had been open at the point you inspected?
Yes, that project was the result of COGCC had received a complaint from the surface owner. In response, there was an inspection, and that inspection led to a requirement for a Form 27. The Form 27 was submitted, and the remediation project 9522 was opened in February of 2016.
And what was the cause of that particular spill again?
There was a release from, there was equipment, basically a manifold and some knockout equipment stored within a shed, and that equipment was leaking.
And with respect to the second open remediation, do you know what the spill cause was to begin that one?
Yes, that would have been a flow line release.
And then the third one, what was the spill cause there?
Also a flow line release, but in that situation off-site. And I would like to add that with regards to the 9522, the first one, at the time of this inspection, the excavation KPK had constructed specifically for 9522 had been reclaimed. So I didn't want to misspeak and say that that everything was at a complete standstill. The excavation for 9522 had been reclaimed, but we had not received any information, any supplemental Form 27s, literally since the project began in early 2016.
Thank you, Mr. Canfield. And I'd like to move on a little bit to following your inspection on August 22nd. How did you determine the status of the 3 remediations at this site?
So I would start, prior to going to conduct the inspections, I would review the record for each of the 3 remediation projects. There were also 2 spill reports, both had been closed, but I would review the record for each of those spill reports. And as well, we had received a couple of complaints, so I would review that information and then proceed to the field. And it's a review of the record for each of the projects that would be reflected in a corrective action where we're saying that we haven't received an update and are asking for an update. For example, we see what was formerly an open excavation that has been reclaimed, but we have not yet received analysis of soil samples that would have been collected to verify the excavation limits, to verify that the impacted material had indeed been removed and the excavation extended into unimpacted native material.
Thank you for that, Mr. Canfield. Now, excuse me, can you talk a little bit about why it's important to have up-to-date Form 27s for these sites?
Certainly. If, again, in this example, if I go in sometime during 2019 to inspect a site where I know there is an active remediation project, active meaning the operator has not submitted a request to close or resolve the remediation project, and I see that an inspection that I previously saw as being open has now been reclaimed. Again, COGCC is blind with respect to the analysis of any material excavated. One of the purposes of this investigation, these investigations, is to determine the extent of any impacts from the release. And typically an operator would do that by collecting for laboratory analysis samples from the walls and floor of the excavation for the purpose of confirming that their excavation did indeed remove all impacted material, and all that's left in those excavation walls and floors would be unimpacted native material. That is the sort of information that we would be requiring, and in the absence of getting it, we simply don't know if the excavation has been reclaimed temporarily or if the operator believes they're done.
Thank you, Mr. Canfield. And turning back to the oldest remediation, remediation 9522, can you briefly describe sort of the progress of that particular site as you understood it?
So I and other inspectors certainly witnessed progress happening at the site. Again, specifically, an excavation appears and then is reclaimed. Unfortunately, there was a significant gap in the record resulting from the operator not submitting updates, progress reports, a gap that began in February of 2016 when the initial Form 27 was submitted and approved, and extended until January of 2020 when again we got the first update, if you will, submittal from the operator in very nearly 4 years, and it was a request to close the project for a determination of no further action being required.
Now, Mr. Canfield, you just spoke about January 14th, 2020 as a date that you received a request to close this particular project. So I'm putting up what staff marked as exhibits 402 and 420. Can you see that on your screen?
Yes, I can.
So on the right side, we have the, can you tell us what we have on the right side of the screen, please?
On the right side is a letter, basically a cover or transmittal letter to me from Susanna Laura Mesa. And attached to that letter is a report. It is the information being submitted for the purpose of basically establishing the technical basis for a request to close the project.
And just to clarify, the exhibit you just described, are you looking at the left side or the right side?
I am looking at the left side, at the letter.
Thank you. And now I direct your attention to the right side. We have exhibit 420. Can you tell me what this exhibit is?
This is a supplemental Form 27 that was received in mid-January of 2020. And it would be the first submission of information from the operator since mid-February of 2016.
And now this letter on the left, it indicates that it was submitted to you. Do you recall receiving it in August 2016?
No, I certainly see the date on the top of the letter, but this letter was attached to the form received on January 14th of 2020. And I saw the discrepancy. The letter and the request included or made with that letter would have required submittal of a supplemental Form 27. So the supplemental Form 27 is how any operator would request the determination of no further action required, and attached to that would be the technical basis for their request. So there's the form, there's the letter. The letter was received on January of 2020, and I had not seen the letter from Ms. Laura Mesa prior to seeing it attached to this form.
The animation I just popped up here, this is the attachment checklist to exhibit 420. And you're saying this remediation progress report, the attachment is the August 2016 information that we're discussing?
Yes, to prepare last night, I did review the record for this. And yes, that document number that you've pulled up matches the what's identified here is remediation progress report. That would be the report to which the letter from Ms. Laura Mesa is attached.
And Mr. Canfield, can you just tell me, when you receive submittals, Form 27s, documents that should be attached to a particular project, what's your habit of uploading these documents to COGCC?
Well, it happens pretty swiftly. So today, it's actually, and really in 2020, it's an automated process.
So would you say once you receive something, you immediately upload it?
Yes.
Okay.
But we'd have to go back years to when that was necessary. We actually had, at one time, dedicated staff that an EPS could ask some sort of document that had been received to be uploaded to our master record database and properly indexed to a remediation project, a spill report. The process now is completely automated, but I can't explain the discrepancy. All I can tell you is I saw that letter for the first time when I reviewed this form. The form arrived in my review queue in mid-January, and I believe I passed it during the first week of February that year.
Thank you, Mr. Canfield. And I'm just going to move on to the next exhibit I've put up on the screen here. Now, this is what's been marked as exhibit 410, and I apologize for the small text, but can you tell me what this document is?
So we're looking at yet another field inspection form. It's for an inspection which I performed. The inspection date, so the date I visited the site was December 17th, 2019. And I actually entered the inspection on December 23rd, 2019. And there is a comment from me that we have received no submittals. There's actually a typo there that I'm probably responsible for. The prior submittal would have been 2/19/16. Oh wait, I'm sorry. I have
Well, this is for,
projects
I think this,
confused. I'm
yeah.
very sorry. Anyway, it's another situation where we are requesting some sort of an update. There's been
And this is for the second remediation. I'm sorry, Mr. Canfield.
Yes.
This is for the second remediation project that was ongoing?
Yes.
And that's the 12787 project?
Yes, that would be the flow line release on the tank battery as opposed to the offsite release.
Thank you. And then now I've put up what's been marked as Exhibit 412. Again, small type. Are you able to tell me what this document is?
Yes. So on that same day, I took advantage of being at this place and inspected all of the remediation projects, all of the spill release points. And again, informing the operator, we haven't seen any information, any submittals since March of 2019, and making a very specific request for a supplemental 27, including figures showing the soil sample collection sites or locations, field screening results and observations, analytical results, as well as the fate of materials transferred off-site. So that would mean that we're asking for any contaminated material to have been sent off-site. We're asking for the manifests for those loads, the haul tickets, the gate tickets at the receiving facility. Laundry list of things we're requesting at that point, as we hadn't heard anything in 10 months.
And Mr. Canfield, for the previous remediation we just spoke of, which was remediation 12787, and then for this one, 13053, do you recall when you received the next Form 27 update on those locations?
No, I don't. I would have to check the record for each of the projects to answer that question.
Thank you, Mr. Canfield. Commissioners, I'd like to point you to pages 12 to 14 of the party's stipulated facts. It includes a particular stipulated fact that indicates that all 3 of these projects received closure, or closure requests were submitted for all 3 of these projects on January 14th, 2020. Now, Mr. Canfield, just one more question for you here. What were the impacts associated with KPK's failure to keep up with or close these remediations?
Well, the excavation associated with the second of the 3 projects was open much longer than was necessary. It was not uncommon to see periods of activity measured in weeks, if not months. When the excavation was open, there was no adequate fencing, no adequate stormwater BMPs around the spoil piles. Issues with that we've already touched on with signs not always present. Just the presence of the open excavation close to homes and close to the road used to access some of those properties was certainly a problem, a threat.
Thank you, Mr. Canfield. I don't have any further questions at this time.
Thank you, Ms. Stafffield. We'll now proceed to cross-examination from KPK's counsel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Canfield, you showed a aerial photo at the beginning or looked at it with Ms. Stafford that shows homes to the, I guess it was the east of the battery. I think you said there were 3 houses there.
2 houses to the east, 1 to the west, 1 to the north, that were outlined in the aerial photo.
So at least 1 and probably 2 of those houses are recent construction and were not there in 2019, early 2020. Isn't that true?
I don't know if that's true. I haven't had a chance to look at the time series aerial photographs.
Signs are needed so that people who want to know who the operator is and have a phone number can find it at the location, correct?
Yes, sir, correct.
I'll share my screen with you. Are you seeing a screen with 2 photos, Mr. Canfield?
Yes, sir, I see it.
So the photo on the right to the back of the excavation, there's a round facility of some kind.
Yes.
I'll represent you. I think that's a separator. Is that what you think it is?
Yes, some sort of separator.
You see the square, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, there's an emission control device on the other side as well.
You see
Yes.
a square right here where my cursor is.
I do, yes.
Is that a sign that would have the number and contact information for KP Kaufman? You remember?
So, first of all, I cannot read what's on that picture, but no, that's not where that information would be posted. There would be, if necessary, placards there to alert emergency responders to the presence of hazardous materials. There you go. But that would not have the emergency contact information.
Well, doesn't it have the phone number right where my cursor is above the word danger?
I'm still cannot read I see the placard that I referred to. So I see KP Kaufman and I see a phone number, but this does not, the requirements for the sign are spelled out in our rule, and this would not satisfy those requirements.
I see.
This would be a warning to emergency responders, fire department, for example, personnel that might need to enter this place to be alert to what hazardous materials could be inside.
You don't think the health hazard information that's depicted here and the other symbols would in fact do exactly what you're saying?
No, I don't.
Let's talk about the rule for signage on a battery. The definition of a battery, I'll represent to you in the 100 series, is a point of collection and disbursement of oil and gas from producing wells. The battery at this site was removed from service and removed from its location to some distance away from the excavation, in fact. That being the case, do you think it required signage?
Yes, I do. Does
the rule say that?
I'm sorry. Yes, I believe they do. And,
okay.
And my observations, I did not see a battery that was literally removed. It's clear in the inspection photos.
Well, the place where the hole is now used to be where the place where the battery was. If the battery was removed from its location, taken out of service, and indeed I'll represent to you, it was never returned to service, it's just an old piece of equipment at this point. It's not an operating battery facility.
I believe the rule requiring the signage would still apply. It is a COGCC facility, a location. KP Kaufman is the operator, the current operator, and there is a requirement to have the sign posted, a sign that satisfies the requirements of our rule.
I appreciate it. Thank you. And I understand the importance of the signage. I'm not meaning to dismiss that. Mr. Canfield, orange fencing, snow fencing as it's called, is typical as at sites like this one. Is it not?
It's typical while an operator is present or as contractors present actively working.
And you ultimately approved the repaired fencing at this site. I want to say it was in January of 2020. Is that correct?
I'd have to check to see, but I believe, yes, there were improvements made to satisfy the corrective action.
And it was orange fencing that was approved at that point, correct?
Again, I would have to look at the inspections to be certain.
The regulations don't require the metal fencing that you were describing, the quote unquote more robust fencing. And indeed, the fencing that was ultimately agreed upon once it was installed to your satisfaction was the snow fence.
We don't prescribe fencing in the regulations. In situations where fencing would be required for any period when the site is unmanned, unstaffed, we will urge and sometimes require in the form of corrective action, something more robust than snow fencing.
You didn't at the end of the day require that here though for KP Kaufman, correct?
Again, I would have to go through the inspections and see exactly where we ended up.
Motion detected at the front door.
I'm going to share my screen again now that I've found the picture I'm looking for. Are you seeing the screen yet?
Yes.
Okay. It appears to me that there's
Mr. Mueller, just for your knowledge, there's a chat box at the bottom right of your screen that we can see as well.
Sorry about that. Mr. Canfield, let's look at this picture of the fencing. First of all, it looks to me like it goes most of the way around the excavation. You see that?
See the fencing, I would not agree that it goes most of the way around the excavation.
It looks like it's been bundled in this area here, correct?
Yes.
Is it possible that was done so that there could be access to the facility and to the property?
May be the case, but at the time these pictures are taken, the facility is unmanned.
So somebody accessed the facility in order to take these pictures.
COGCC personnel, not an employee of the operator or one of their contractors.
You said you were uncertain when you visited the site whether they were people present or not on at least some occasions. Is that correct?
I only recall encountering KPK personnel there twice.
So you did on some occasions encounter personnel there, correct?
Yes.
These pictures also show what looks to me for all the world like berming around the side of the excavation. If you can see my cursor, isn't this a berm?
I'm not sure I see a berm there, to be honest.
You don't see a sloping mound of earth that comes right up to the edge of the excavation?
No, and I certainly don't see something that would completely surround the excavation or any material being removed.
Well, you see that there's equipment at this end of the excavation, and indeed, the soil that's being removed, the soil itself is inside the excavation, not on the side of the facility.
And that was not, I also see that there is equipment and there are personnel there, but this sort of activity would not be representative of what I saw during the course of, and other inspectors during the course of, I believe, 17 inspections.
Just to be clear, there's nothing wrong with earthen berms. There are other alternatives like wattles and silt fences, but berms too are acceptable if they're deemed adequate, correct?
You are correct.
Do you see a screen that is the NOAV that we've been talking about?
Yes, sir, I do.
The violation based on 1105 sub B recites that engineering staff came out and saw flow lines with cut ends around the side and noted that the flow lines were open and not locked or tagged. That's the basis of the 1105 violation. Do you see that?
Yes, sir, I do.
That same paragraph is recited as the basis for the 603 sub F violation as well. It's essentially verbatim.
Objection. This is outside the scope of Mr. Canfield's testimony. He did not testify about Rule 1105 or Rule 603.
I was about to say this would be a question for Mr. Schlagenhoff or Mr. McLaren. They administer that portion of our rules.
The only point I wanted to make is that for the
Could I get a ruling on my objection, please?
Well, if I could respond to your objection, then we could get a ruling.
We'll let Mr. Mueller respond.
My only point, Mr. Chairman, is that the same activity has been cited for two separate violations.
Yeah, we're going to sustain that objection. I think that point's better made perhaps after the rest of the witnesses have commented on these particular rules, and perhaps the other witnesses are in closing.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Canfield, I'll admit that I had a little bit of trouble following the form discussion. You saw an example of, you saw a letter and a report from Ms. Laura Mesa back in 2016 for one of these remediation projects, correct?
Clear, I saw the date on the letter, but I never actually saw the letter or report until January of 2020.
You don't think you received it back in 2016?
No. If I had been, it would have been added to the record for the remediation project. It is unlikely the letter would have come as a standalone document either. If as stated in the letter, the purpose was to request closure of the remediation project, which is something that would have required a supplemental Form 27 to which the letter would be attached.
So can you see my screen now, Mr. Canfield?
Kirk, you've got a chat box that was up, sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, could you point me to what exhibit that is?
I can't because it's not an exhibit. I just received it within the last hour. It was sent on when testimony was offered by Mr. Canfield that he didn't see Ms. Laura Mesa's submittal. This is an email chain that I would submit, verifies conversation between Mr. Canfield and Ms. Laura Mesa in August of 2016 with regard to that submittal.
I believe this should have been disclosed to staff if they intended to use this.
I agree that in a perfect world, that would have happened. We didn't anticipate that Mr. Canfield was going to testify as he has. We would offer this as a rebuttal exhibit, and with a little bit of patience, I think we can. Are you still seeing the chat box, Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Yes,
Yes, we are.
I think council wants you to offer it as demonstrative.
Well, that's plan B, but my plan A would be to submit it with a label as a rebuttal exhibit if it pleases the chairman.
Ms. Stafford, was there any allegation made prior to today that Mr. Canfield had not seen that that letter from Ms. Laura Mesa?
Any allegation? No, we were clarifying that it was attached to that January 2020 submittal, and that I believe there is a stipulated fact that says the letter was submitted on 2016, but there was no indication on whether it was ever received, or at least we didn't know.
We're going to let this in as a rebuttal exhibit. I think that's appropriate given the in response to Mr. Canfield's testimony today.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Understood.
We will endeavor to get it labeled and share it with staff, and if they want to have rebuttal testimony with regard to this. I acknowledge that this came out of the blue. It certainly did for me as well. Mr. Canfield, once a site has been closed, you don't require supplemental rule 27s be filed. Is that correct?
No, sir. Once we have approved an operator's request to close a project, that's where the record ends. Unless in extraordinary circumstances, they might be reopened, but that would be very rare.
I don't have any further questions right now for Mr. Canfield, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Mueller. Ms. Stafford, redirect.
Thank you, Chair. Just a few questions. Mr. Canfield, Council asked you about the fencing surrounding this particular excavation. And could you just repeat or clarify, I guess, when is this particular fencing, this orange fencing, appropriate?
In my experience, it's appropriate while there is activity taking place. While the operator has their personnel or contractors present. I understand certainly the advantage of being able to quickly deploy and, when necessary, create openings in the snow fencing. But it just isn't very durable if the site is left unmanned or unattended for any length of time. It's not uncommon to see it fail to blow down.
And on the dates of your inspections here, August 22nd, 2019 and December 17th, do you recall if the site was manned?
I would have to check. Off the top of my head, without checking my inspections, I wouldn't be able to say.
And I think we talked about the snow fencing that was ultimately okayed. Did you approve that because KPK was on site doing work at that point?
Well, at that moment, yes, there were KPK personnel present, equipment present, and there were activities happening. And under those circumstances, the orange fencing is appropriate.
I'm just gonna share my screen here quickly. Council, can you see what I just shared? These are the pictures that Council also showed you, which staff marked as Exhibit 409. And I believe we were talking about the berms or lack thereof in this left-hand picture. Do you recall that conversation?
Yes, I do.
Now, if there are berms in this picture, would you say they're impervious?
I have to say, I do not see anything that would pass muster as an appropriate BMP. Well,
So
I do realize the site's being actively worked at that moment. I also see the tanks for the tank battery in the picture.
and can you see the I guess, did you take these pictures?
I would need to check to see if this is one of my inspections. I believe it is, but the date timestamp and watermark on the picture is different from what is used currently. So I would need to check to verify that I was the inspector who entered this inspection.
So if there are berms in this picture, are they, could material go over these berms as, you know, the berms in this picture? Or stormwater,
It
excuse
could,
me?
yes, in a storm event.
And if, with these particular berms, is it your understanding that, you know, stormwater could go through these berms?
Well,
If
we'd be
there are
more
berms?
concerned about what you see perhaps in the picture on the right, where you see the pipe that is there to the side of the excavator, and you know, berm, I don't know, there's elevated material there. We'd be concerned about erosion, that material eroding.
Thank you, Mr. Canfield. That's the end of my questions for Mr. Canfield, but Mr. Chair, could I ask you a question with respect to the last minute email we just were talking about?
Go ahead, Ms. Stafford.
Mr. Chairman, I would like a chance for one follow-up question, Mr. Canfield, but I'm happy to defer on that for a moment.
Let's hear from Ms. Stafford, and then depending on where that goes, we may move into commissioner questions and back to a brief redirect. And at that point, if there's something arising, then perhaps a brief cross at that point, just to stick to the format that we've maintained thus far.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Ms. Stafford.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would ask for a brief break so that Mr. Mueller could email this email to council so that I can have an opportunity to review it prior to going further here. And I'm wondering if this particular exhibit will also be e-filed.
I think it's appropriate to take a break here. We were scheduled for a break at 11 anyways, so let's go ahead and we'll plan a 15-minute break. Before that, I'm sorry, what was your last question to council, Ms. Stafford?
I was wondering if this particular exhibit will be e-filed, or how else it will,
Do you have plans for that, Ms.
make it
Mueller?
into the record.
Yes, we've labeled it. It's going to be Exhibit CC. I've got it here. I can email it to whomever, and I think we can also upload it through the filing system.
Will you send it to Ms. Stafford and send it to Ms. Larson as well, and see that it makes its way into the e-filing system, I think is appropriate. And then Ms. Stafford, you can consider that over the break, and we will come back to discuss when we return. Does that sound fair?
I believe it does, and when I stated I was finished with my redirect at the moment, I meant prior to being able to sort of look through this email. I think I would like the opportunity to redirect on a few questions that might arise.
That's fair. We will we'll take our break till 11:05. We'll return and recommence at that time.
Thank you.